Welcome to SOCH 444, Survey Research. Once you have completed the lecture, you will be asked to take a short comprehension quiz. This quiz will help you find gaps in your understanding and help you identify areas in need of further review. I look forward to seeing you in class. The classroom is ultimately an artificial environment. Here, we ask you to develop ideas based on what we, and this we is a very big we, the educational institution, the field, professional associations, the government, and so forth, think it is important for you to master as part of this discipline. Hence, while normally you would begin with a research question or problem and then assess the most efficacious way to answer that question, in this case, you will be artificially attempting to select a question or problem that is best addressed by a survey. Fundamentally, research is usually the result of a question, problem, or idea that is based on both the researcher's mastery of the field and his or her personal passion. Some potential sources for research ideas include your personal experiences, something in the mass media, a critical debate in your field, something new that is affecting social life, and so forth. For example, I had initially planned to write my doctoral dissertation as an application of Bourdieu's concepts to gender relations in men's and women's college basketball. As a longtime participant in adult co-ed recreational softball, I decided to write a paper on this topic for a class. As I began researching the project, I discovered that there was almost no literature on adult recreation for non-elite athletes. This allowed me an opportunity to combine my personal interest with a professional interest, and this became an engaging project for me. Take a moment to consider what topics you would be interested in studying and if this project would be appropriate for a survey. When selecting a topic, always consider who the intended audience is. What are the expectations and requirements to bring a presentation of your research to this audience? What sort of presentation of results will this audience expect? What will make the most sense to this audience? What would an enlightening discussion look like? Preparing to present to academics in the field versus students versus a lay audience are all very different types of presentations. It is critical that you begin with providing enough background information for the reader so he or she can understand what leads up to your research question and design. This serves dual purposes: to demonstrate your mastery or competence in your field, and to provide sufficient background knowledge to make sense of your study and eventual analysis. This is accomplished with the literature review that will be discussed in depth in an upcoming module. I am often asked, why did you become a sociologist? The short answer to that is, as a child, I was often told that I couldn't do things I seemed to be pretty good at, shouldn't enjoy things I seemed to enjoy, and that other people should and could do those things. This didn't seem to make much sense to me. If I liked sports, cars, and the color green, why was this a problem? My best friends were all encouraged in these things. My parents didn't seem to have a problem with me playing sports in my favorite green t-shirt, so why were teachers, babysitters, and other kids telling me that this was wrong? I came to sociology through gender discrimination. As I got older, I read amazing pieces of literature that problematized poverty, racism, sexism, and heterosexism, and I began to wonder about not only these experiences, but the structures that constructed different experiences for people just because of seemingly minor biological differences. When I arrived as an undeclared freshman at UC Berkeley, I shopped for my major, taking a host of social science classes. Anne Swidler's Intro to Sociology course ignited my burgeoning sociological imagination. I remember feeling like most of the time I looked at the same things as other people, but I was standing further back. Sociology seemed like a whole group of people standing with me, struggling to figure out how to make the world more equitable. I felt like I was finally truly home. What about you? What made sociology or psychology your major and hopefully one of your passions? What things have you learned that have inspired, inflamed, terrified, horrified, and demanded that your soul stand up and take notice? So once you have a topic, how do you narrow it down into something that can be researched, studied, or investigated? First and foremost, start by examining the literature in your field and related fields. What is already known on the topic? What questions have others raised? Are there any key debates regarding this topic? Is it something that might change over time as other aspects of our culture change? Are key terms defined in the field in specific ways? In past studies, have concepts been measured in effective ways? Second, talk to your colleagues. Can professors or students point you in the direction of useful research? Do others have creative ideas for measuring concepts? Third, if you have a general idea for a topic, try applying it to a specific context. If you're interested in the impact of cultural centers on student retention, try studying the impact on one campus first. Lastly, consider your aim or goal. What is the purpose of this study? There may be several different purposes at different levels. For example, you may want to make people aware of a social problem or issue, collect concrete evidence of a problem, and pass your methods requirement all at the same time. For the purpose of gaining first-hand experience with survey research, the class will work together to, first, select a research topic, second, develop a testable hypothesis or several hypotheses, third, design and administer an original survey, fourth, analyze the data produced by this survey, and fifth, present results in the form of a solo-authored term paper. Keep in mind that for the purposes of this class, you will need a topic that works well for a survey. The project requires hypothesis testing and is considered a quantitative research methodology. The good news is that the computer is going to do the actual calculations for you. Your job is to construct meaningful, testable hypotheses. You can view the module on hypotheses for more information later in the class. Keep in mind, surveys are a good way to measure basic demographic information, gender, ethnicity, age, attitudes, beliefs, and self-reports of behavior, but not everything can be studied with a survey. When selecting a topic, also keep in mind the limitations of our data set. We're going to ask family and friends to be our participants. Hence, there might not be a large number of people with certain characteristics in our sample. One must always consider external limitations to research. The ideal way to conduct research and the concessions you need to make to circumstance always force a compromise. Time. Deadlines pose a significant restriction on research in both a beneficial and problematic way. Indeed, some research might never be concluded without some sort of deadline to curb the obsessive restructuring of the perfectionist researcher. On the other hand, time limits may force a researcher to use less than ideal strategies. In our case, we have a severe time limitation that much of the detailed pre-testing and development of sampling strategies usual to research must be severely abbreviated. Money. Research can be quite expensive. The budget always imposes a limitation. Just as you may not be able to indulge in all of your desires when it comes to fun, one generally cannot have the ideal research project because of the financial cost being too high. For example, the Empire survey that we used to subcontract to CSU San Bernardino, a random digit dialing survey of approximately 1,000 residents of the Inland Empire, cost us between $50,000 and $60,000 most years. We did offer the survey in both English and Spanish, but we would have liked to include a wider range of languages, but the cost was prohibitive. Ethical considerations. Are there serious ethical concerns with the process by which you will be collecting your data? Are your subjects vulnerable? Is there some concern about how your data will be used? Is it imperative that you fully consider the ethical implications of your research? We will discuss ethics in a future module. The IRB, or Professional Association Approval. Prior to beginning research involving human subjects, you must obtain approval from the Institutional Research Board at your university. Even if you enter private practice, one should consider if any professional organizations have guidelines or requirements. The IRB protects not only your participants, but also you. For example, if you promise confidentiality to participants and your research notes are subpoenaed, the university would be required to provide legal defense for you. Access to resources. Will you be able to gain access to what you need for your research design? Students often have interesting hypotheses for this class that just won't work because there aren't enough individuals in the sample to make any statements about that population. For example, I had a student who had a series of hypotheses that explored transgendered versus cisgendered experiences of victimization. All of our hypotheses were well written, but unfortunately we usually only have 2 to 5 transgendered individuals in our sample. This isn't enough to perform any meaningful hypothesis testing. The politics of research. In many cases, the type of research one does, the school of thought with which one allies oneself, even the questions one asks, sometimes place you at the center of a political debate within your field. Sometimes at different points in your career, you may want to avoid being too controversial. At other points, you may choose to tackle controversial research. Either way, you should make that choice consciously. So why is it crucial to have a solid research design? Generally speaking, our everyday thinking and even our initial beliefs about what we intend to research are replete with inaccuracies, biases, and misconceptions. A good research design allows us to overcome our blind spots by providing us with accurate data. So what sort of mistakes do we tend to make? People tend to ask biased questions. As we view the world, most of us tend to start with questions that already contain some biases about how we think the world ought to work. A good research design works to distill our questions down to something that is less biased in how we frame the questions we ask. Often, our initial ideas contain within them erroneous beliefs. Hence, exploring existing research is paramount to improving our research questions. Selective perception observation. People tend to see things that confirm already held beliefs, even when confronted with evidence to the contrary. For example, I was listening to NPR as a researcher was discussing new evidence that suggests risky sexual behavior among teens was down, along with a decrease in teenage pregnancies. A caller insisted that the research could not be correct because she was sure she saw many pregnant, insert inappropriate ethnic slur here, teenagers hanging around on street corners. Obviously, this person had preconceived notions about young people, people of other races, and an overinflated sense of judgment. She really had no way of knowing the age, race, and even pregnancy status of many she was seeing and judging to be unwed teenage mothers. Even if she did happen to see an unwed teenage mother, why would that discredit a Center for Disease Control study? Generalizations and assumptions. Similarly, as in the example above, people often make assumptions based on inaccurate generalizations about a group. Without accurate data, we would actually know very little about the social world. Limited, biased samples. In our everyday lives, we generally choose to associate with those who are similar to ourselves. As a result, those who we survey or discuss current events with tend to be from the same small biased group of people. This gives us a very distorted view of the beliefs of the general public. For example, when this class did a campus-wide survey, we found very different political views by college. If we only talked to people in class, this campus would appear far more politically and socially liberal than it actually is. Once you have an idea or a topic for your project, the first step is always a comprehensive literature review. It is imperative that you start by finding out what your field already knows, thinks, believes about a topic. You will need to both demonstrate your familiarity with your field and inform the reader of any requisite background information he or she needs to understand your project. Moreover, you will need to provide a theoretical orientation to your work. With whom in your field are you allied? If there's a key debate over an issue, on which side do you fall? If there are standard definitions in your field, make sure you clarify these for the project. The literature in your field should provide a source of inspiration for new ideas and clear guidelines for how existing research has been done. Creative new ideas for research designs may also emerge. In the real world, your research design should follow from your research question. In the artificial classroom environment, your research design must be for a convenient survey distributed via social media. As a class, you will select a general topic for the survey, design the survey, and then distribute it. The general meaning of the word survey is to examine or look comprehensively. A social science survey takes the same idea but codifies it as a methodology designed to provide an overview of a population or group. Surveys ask questions to measure demographics, attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors. A survey can measure these things for individuals, but you can also survey groups, units, organizations, and so forth. For example, one might survey all of the clubs on campus about membership, what the club provides, and so forth. The development of surveys. The earliest record of a survey is generally what is called a census, or an attempt to measure the whole population. References to a census can be found in the Bible and the histories of many nations. Over the last 300 years, with the growth of the bureaucratization of the modern state, surveys have increased in use. Really, the technological expansion of the last 50 years has significantly increased the viability of surveys. Without modern computer applications, the mathematics necessary for hypothesis testing would be incredibly time-consuming. Now, the computer can give us an answer in a matter of seconds and facilitates all sorts of creative data manipulation. Sometimes this can provide more accurate results. Sometimes it can impede research or obscure results. In U.S. social theory for many years, surveys meant positivistic research. Doing surveys meant a specific theoretical worldview. However, today, surveys are used in a wide range of projects with a diversity of theoretical orientations. So what do surveys do well? When done properly, surveys are great for projects that require one to analyze or describe a group of people. Surveys can allow one to generalize or apply to a wider population observations and analyses. In some cases, the observations may provide valuable information for understanding other populations. Perhaps a well-done survey at Cal Poly Pomona would also be useful in understanding challenges faced by students at Cal State LA. Survey data allows us to test theories, provide insight to policymakers, measure the success of new programs, and understand populations at one point in time and across time. When something new happens, surveys help us get a handle on what we should study. So do surveys guarantee generalizable, unbiased results and inform policies and policymakers? No, of course not. Statistics can be manipulated, as Darrell Huff so famously points out in How to Lie with Statistics. Good social science strives to present the most accurate picture possible, but even if you do a great job of this, you may still find that no one listens. In addition, there is always bias inherent, though you should do your best to confront, acknowledge, address, and minimize bias. But bias will always be present in the questions we ask, how we group or categorize people. The categories that have historical significance reflect relations of privilege and oppression. For example, there is no clear biological basis to race, but it reflects colonial relations of privilege and oppression. Labels matter. Some labels are more appealing than others. And lastly, the interpretation of data always involves your preconceived notions and those of your field. Historically, survey research was aligned with structural functionalism and positivism. In this view, a single truth with a capital T could be uncovered through scientific study. Today, theories that better deal with the effects of privilege and oppression employ survey research in a variety of types of research. So please don't think surveys preclude activist, radical, or theoretical research. Fortunately, surveys were not abandoned as a methodology. However, keep in mind surveys are not always appropriate. In-depth why questions are sometimes better addressed with interviews. The primary strength of survey research is generalizable data and hypothesis testing. What are the advantages and weaknesses of survey research? Surveys are very versatile. Most topics could have some survey data collected on them. Surveys are also efficient. You can gather data from a large number of individuals relatively quickly when compared to focus groups, in-depth interviews, and participant observation. And finally, the ability to generalize to the larger population with the help of inferential statistics is an enormous advantage. On the other hand, surveys are limited by the fact they are often self-reports. They measure what people say they do, not what they actually do. Moreover, surveys can lack nuance and subtleties of human interaction. For example, perception of immigration as a problem can mean an anti-immigrant stance or a concern that sufficient resources are not being provided for immigrants. Survey data is still interpreted by human beings. As survey researchers like to say, when you encounter a problem with your computer analysis, it's usually the nut with the mouse. Generally, there are two types or styles of survey research. Large-scale, research-intensive surveys that use representative samples and are designed for the purpose of generalizing about a larger population. There are also smaller-scale, more focused surveys that focus on smaller groups. These surveys are not focused on generalizing, but on studying a specific group. So in conclusion, surveys can be a valuable tool in your toolkit of social science methodologies. By developing an array of skills, mixed methods research becomes possible. Surveys combine well with qualitative methodologies that can add explanation and in-depth information. Finally, here are a few quotes from Darrell Huff on statistics.